Wrap up. Okay, great. Well, thank you all so much for being here. I'm really excited to be having this first kind of conversation of this kind where we're really lucky to be joined by David Lindheimer, who recently started working with Indigo Ag. And we've chatted a little bit, David and I, after he finished LFA and was transitioning into this role. And I just have was sharing how, interesting the conversations are around incentivizing carbon sequestration and soil health practices that involve bringing more carbon into the soil. And there's just so much interest in farmers that we work with at Climate Farm School and participants and alumni in effectively catalyzing these transitions to regenerative practices. And David has an inside seat now to one of the companies that's really driving this forward and getting a lot of recognition for this work. So I was really excited to invite him to come in and speak to our Climate Farm School alumni community. And so invited all 133 people who've gone through our Climate Farm School program, plus a few scattered LFA folks. And I thought this could just be a really nice conversation for David to come in and share with us his journey into working with Indigo, what he's learned so far in the first 5 months of being there. And it sounds like it's a very dynamic and change embracing work environment. And I think also because many of us are seeking roles and transitions into more direct climate/regenerative ag impact and scale, there's a lot of questions we can probably ask and discuss together about what's needed, where are there opportunities, what is like an effective way to go about this transition, using experiences like Learning for Action and Climate Farm School as kind of leverage for finding new work in this space. And I think there's also just a lot more um, energy and time and professional expertise to bring into this regen ag kind of support piece. And I don't think all of the roles totally exist yet for what for the scale of change that is needed. So we don't have to put you on the hook for answering that question, David, but I think this might be useful as people are asking questions in the more discussion part to kind of share what you're experiencing and seeing and ways that you're trying to create opportunities for yourselves in the regen ag support piece, working directly with farmers or working potentially in some other parts of the food system that are also needed to change in order to have a regenerative, climate resilient, and equitable system. So that's my little intro and spiel, and big thank you to David for joining us. And I'm going to basically turn it over to him for the next, I don't know, we didn't talk exactly time, but like 15, 20 minutes or so. And he'll share what he's been going through, and then we'll have plenty of time for everyone's questions and open discussion with this group. So thanks, and over to you, David.
Thank you, Lainey. I first of all, I want to say, on one hand, I feel super fortunate to have landed a role where I do feel like I'm making an impact in this space, both on the agriculture side and for climate change. But I'm also jealous of all of you guys for having gone through the Climate Farm School. I have not done that. And so I think you've had that experience. I am very much on the steep part of the learning curve in the agriculture space and enjoying it a lot, but also like daunting. There's just a lot to know. So I'll kind of share, like Lainey said, I'll share a little bit of how I got here and what I've learned so far and what I'm focused on going forward. But then I really would love to just kind of take a lot of your questions and hear your perspectives on things. So just a little bit of my background. So I've been in software my whole career. I spent big chunks of time at Amazon and at Microsoft, worked at small companies, startups in between all of that, lived all over the world, lived in China for a while, lived in Amsterdam, lived all over the US. But I got to a point in about 2022, I left my job in Amsterdam and realized I was kind of no longer satisfied with just software jobs that made money and helped the company make money. And got to the point where I realized I wanted purpose in my role. I wanted to do something that I felt like I was making a positive impact. The other impetus, I don't know if I shared this with you ever, Lainey, but like I have two daughters. They're both kind of grown up, little adults now. And I was talking to my older daughter who was working at Microsoft at the time and said, of course you'll, take advantage of the benefits. You'll put money in a 401k. And she said something like, why would I put money in the 401k when the earth is going to be basically desolate and destroyed by the time I retire? And that like Yeah, I mean, see some of the reactions there. That was the way I felt. It was like it was a gut shot. And it caused me to realize that, perhaps just the generational lens was causing me not to pay as much attention as I needed to, and not really devote my energy in the right way. So, lucky enough to kind of learn about Terra.do and took the Learning for Action course, which gave me the broad survey view. And then, kind of systematically spend some time thinking about like where was the intersection of what I'm good at and where the need was in this space, which led me to narrow down into, first of all, kind of not pure startups, but companies that were scaling or were kind of in the process of growing. And also either energy or agriculture were the two kind of segments where I felt like software was poised to help drive adoption, right? Like there's a bunch of science work still to be done, but the science is kind of coming together. And so you now know it's just about kind of getting more people engaged, getting more farmers to take advantage of these practices. On the energy side, of course, it's about kind of driving electrification and about driving smart approaches to all of that. But that's where I was, and then, my job search was really about kind of putting it out in the universe and talking to my network. I'm blessed to have like a really good network from working at the big companies. And, it's just a matter of me talking to people and saying, hey, here's what I'm looking for. Happened to talk to one of my ex-colleagues from Amazon who said, oh, I just heard about this job at Indigo Ag, and that's how it played out. So I think it's a combination of, putting putting it out to the universe, putting your name out there, and then maybe a little bit of luck, a little bit of right place, right time. So, I know for a lot of people, and I talk to a lot of people looking for roles like this, and it's tough. Right now, we're in this kind of correction mode in my mind, in the kind of at least the software tech sector, where we overhired for many years, and now we're kind of dealing with the consequences of that. And so it's a volume game. Like to me, it's just a volume game of like talking to a lot of people, getting, being in the right places where the opportunity might emerge, and then striking when it happens. So I feel fortunate to have found this job. It also happens to be that Boston's my original home, so it kind of brought me back to my hometown, and so I'm fortunate to that. It's also it is a remote first company, so even though it's based in Boston, and right now I'm sitting in the Boston office, I actually live on Martha's Vineyard, which is kind of a lovely place to live, and I come up here once a month, and so it's been a great setup. So that's kind of my background and how I got here. I was going to talk a little bit about Indigo. From talking to Lainey earlier, it sounds like you guys probably already are a little familiar with the company. But I wanted to, because the company's evolved quite a bit, and there's definitely a backstory to this company. I want to explain where we are now, and then I'll talk a little bit about the backstory as we get through some of the challenges. But really, we have two big lines of business. We have the what we call the biologicals business, which is basically seeds with microbial coatings, so that when you plant the seed, you're getting the benefit of the microbes in the soil at the same time. And as an example of that, we just launched a product called Z15, and I'm not the person who names products, but it's called Z15, and it's a bionematicide. So it deals with nematode problems, but through a biological approach to it. I just told you everything I can about that business. I'm not super involved. That's about it. I think about it. It's kind of like a pharmaceutical R&D pipeline. We make a lot of bets. There's labs right next door to me here. There's a big lab in Raleigh, Durham. They're looking at ways to kind of, through microbial science, augment seed growing in a natural way. So that's that part of the business. That's actually quite a nice business. It works pretty well. It's not, it's kind of the kind of business that grows a bit linearly. It's not like a software technology business that has a little bit more of a power function to it, but it's a nice business for us. Part of the digital business, the way that works is that we kind of operate between the farmer and the grain buyer. And our digital technology and our customers are largely the big grain farmers in the middle of the country. We basically operate a little bit like a marketplace, right? We support the farmer in identifying very localized set of practices that they can do on their farm in order to move towards regenerative practices, cover crop, rotations, grazing, fertilizer application changes. But we recommend that in a very localized way based on the crops that they're growing. And then we help them monetize that through one of two mechanisms. Mechanism one is through carbon credits. So we're in year 3, which basically puts us at least 2 years, maybe 3 years ahead of really anyone else in terms of verified carbon credits in the agriculture sector. But basically, given a set of practices, we run through a science pipeline that, we collect a bunch of data. That data is collected through a combination of remote sensing, so satellite data that we acquire, and we model kind of what practice changes have been observed, when crops were grown, when rotations were happening. We also do direct import from farm management systems. So like my John Deere and Trimble and so forth, we collect that data. And then as a last resort, but we do a lot of it, we actually ask the farmer to give us some direct data. We don't like to do that because farmers don't want to sit in front of laptops, and because it's a burden. But we do some of that as well, and we're always striving to reduce that burden to the farmer. But given that data, we then run it through a science pipeline. We have some proprietary science that models the impact in terms of both sequestration of carbon and emissions reduction. And then we submit to a verifier. We use CAR, Carbon Action, Climate Action Reserve, to verify those credits, and then we sell them. And we've been able to position in the agriculture sector at the quality end of the spectrum, because we do that primary empirical data collection. I should mention there was one other piece. We do some soil sampling as well. That's on a sampling basis. So we send out people with an iPad application to go here, get this soil sample, run it through, and that gives us ground truth data in terms of the actual soil organic carbon. And we've been able to sell those carbon credits. So we sell the carbon credits. We then remit most of the return to the farmer. So they get their return on the investment. The other part of our business is kind of a scope 3 part of our business. So we basically work with big CPG customers. Examples are Walmart and Anheuser-Busch, to run programs to either introduce practice change or recognize practice changes. The nice thing about the scope 3 world is it doesn't have to pass the additionality test. So if you've made a practice change 2 years ago, you can actually still get a return on investment, because Walmart and Anheuser-Busch are willing to pay a premium. In this case, it's rice, but they're willing to pay a premium for that rice because we verify those practices. And in the rice world, I actually just came from a meeting on it. It's kind of irrigation practices and still fertilizer application. And one thing that we are not doing is stubble burning. Apparently that's a practice that used to be recognized, thought to drive positive climate impact, but the air quality impact is just too negative. So we've kind of taken that off our list. But we do that, and then we kind of give a report to Walmart and Anheuser-Busch and other customers that I'm not able to disclose yet. And they put it into their ESG reporting. They kind of claim it as part of their scope 3 emissions or sequestration reduction, emissions reduction and sequestration improvement. So that's the way the business model works. I'm just going to talk about carbon credits for a minute, because I know it's a big topic when I went through LFA, and there's definitely some hair on that business. Definitely, some of the negative press and actual negativity came from the forestry version of these carbon credits. It came from a particular verifier called Vera. I happen to believe that it's a legitimate business, the carbon credit business. It's a transfer of capital from rich companies to farmers who would like to make practice changes but need some subsidy in order to do it. We do position at the quality end of the spectrum. I think ag-based carbon credits are viewed as a higher quality than the forestry version of it, because it's easier to show additionality. It's easier to show permanence versus kind of the forestry ones where leakage is a real problem. We've been actually getting higher prices year on year for the carbon credits as a reflection of the fact that there is quality there. So that's kind of who we are, what we do. I will just quickly address the fact that there's a bit of a checkered past at Indigo. This company was founded in 2013. The original CEO founder is a charismatic guy, evangelist, really great storyteller, really great fundraiser. Made a lot of promises to the market. Actually went into the market with, I think, kind of a disruptor mentality, which meant like he was saying things like, "Hi, I'm from Boston. I'm going to teach you how to do farming. You've been doing it all wrong." Not really the right approach to enter this market. But I think more importantly, just how to spread very thin, like 12 different business segments, a lot of crazy business ideas. Most of them didn't work. And so, since 2020, when he left, and we kind of took on a new CEO, a guy named Ron Hosvepian. It's been all about focus, and it's been really about restoring trust. And that's not something you do in one day or even 1 year. It's a journey we're on. There are some reputation issues with Indigo that we see in the marketplace. I was out there talking to some of our customers last week, and they said we had to be 20% better than the competition because of some of the reputation challenges. And we just accept that challenge. That's just something we've got to deal with. It's, that you can't undo the past. You just can kind of correct going forward. So that's where we are. I see there's some hands up already, but I was gonna just get through some of the things I've learned so far, and what I'm doing going forward. Unless, Lainey, you want me to pause here.
No, that sounds great. Go ahead and do that. And if you have your hand raised, just keep it raised, and then we'll cycle in. Unless your question, like double raise it if it's like you just said something that confused me. But yeah, clarifying questions are totally legit. Otherwise, keep your hands raised, and we'll cycle them in. But yeah, go ahead, David.
Okay, I'll keep going. So just a couple of bullet points on what I've learned so far. I've been here just over 5 months so far. So first off, look, the learning curve is steep. I mean, I knew nothing about agriculture. I'm kind of a city boy. I've worked in big software companies. So like what I've learned in the first 5 or 6 months has been immense. And I still feel like I'm at this point. I'm very early on in the cycle. And I don't know, I feel comfortable with the beginner mindset. I feel like I'm able to kind of be humble, but it is daunting when I get into conversations on both sides, like the farmers talking about the way they think about their operations and their fields and their crops, and then our science team, who are basically PhDs coming from the best universities. There's a lot, right? And so that's okay. I don't feel like I need to know everything. I need to be able to appreciate what it all is about. I need to know where the experts are. And then I think part of my core job is to understand the intersection, right? Because there actually is a tension, right? The science folks want really great inputs, and they want people to do things exactly right. And they want to be able to defend all the claims that we're helping people make. Farmers just want to run their business and get their crops in the ground and get them out and sell them. That's what they want to do. They want to protect their soil. But they're business people, right? And so it's really important to kind of understand the pragmatic reality of buying and selling grain, which is actually the second part. Like the value chain is pretty complex. Actually, rice is the easier part. It tends to be a little bit more vertically integrated. But in wheat and corn, we do a lot in the corn space. That's super complex, like grain originators and the ABCD kind of big processors, understanding the difference between cash price and future price and transportation costs. One of our farmers has invested in on-farm storage so that he can play the futures a little bit more flexibly. Like just understanding that it's super complex. Then ethanol is coming into play, right? So some of this corn is going to ethanol refineries, some of it's going to feedlots. It's not as simple as I had hoped. The farmer perspective is really interesting to kind of just appreciate and empathize with, right? Like the farmers who have like 40 years of crops, like they just think in terms of these finite terms of, I've got a crop year, I've got 39 left, right? And so the investments, the bets that they make, I'm used to this more continuous cycle. Like I worked at Amazon on the retail business. I could make it a change, observe it for 2 weeks and see if it was positive or not, flip it up or down, right? Here we operate on these crop year cycles. And so we might ask for a practice change. There was some stuff that happened in our last year of rice where there were certain practice changes that we thought were going to be positive in terms of sequestration. Turned out like when we observed the soil carbon, when we ran it through our modeling, and it wasn't. We'd already suggested these crop practices. So that's something we learned for next year. But again, that's like one of the 40 years for that farmer. And so it's hard to kind of appreciate how to run a business where you don't get to kind of observe the results for a year or for a period of time. Relationships, like the importance of relationships at the local level is really fascinating, right? It's not like a digital business where everybody's super arm's length. The farmers rely on their co-ops. They rely on their input providers, their agronomy partners. There's just a lot of connective tissue. And, there's folks on our sales team who basically know everybody in the market. Like it's remarkable, their Rolodex. And so the relationship is as important as the results. And I think kind of appreciating that that's an important part of the equation is really important. And then I've already talked about Indigo's checkered past. I mean, it's just something that, I kind of knew coming into it. it's bigger and more complex than I thought when I came in. But again, I accept that as a little bit of a challenge. We have turned the page. Our customers, they're not obligated to just kind of respect that. They have to kind of see it and they have to feel it before they kind of feel that change. But that is where we are internally. What I feel like I need to keep doing going forward is, number one, start with the customer. The good news is, like, that was already my mentality, right? It can be a different customer here. Like, my customer is the farmer. It's also the agronomist. It's the grain buyer. It's the consumer product good that's selling the product to the public. They're all our customers, but for me, it's just about listening with humility and appreciating the unique challenges and opportunities that they're facing. Like, it's not their job to design the system. It's their job to kind of tell me what they're trying to accomplish. It's my job then to translate into what we need to build and how to make it effective. Like any profit, like, we are a profit seeking company. We're not a profit making company just yet. We are a profit seeking company, which means, we are also interested in competitive moat. We're interested in building flywheels so that, like, as we collect all this data, it makes our product better. It gives us an advantage. I don't think that's inconsistent with wanting the best thing for the earth. I actually think it's the right way to accomplish it. But I think it's important to recognize that, you have to knit together the incentive system of being a company that has shareholders and needs to make a profit with the incentive system of wanting the right thing for the earth. I think they're consistent. I know sometimes there's tensions, and it's important to just recognize that. For me, one of the biggest principles is consistency and predictability, right? Like I told you about the rice example, we're, dealing with corn farmers all the time, telling them, basically giving them a point of view about what the value of their field from a carbon credit harvest standpoint is going to be. And that is dependent on the market. It depends on how well our pipeline converts all these acres and fields into carbon credits, and then it depends on the price of the carbon credit. We've opted to give the farmer upside, so if the price goes up, they get more money, which means we haven't opted for a fixed payout, and some of our competitors operate differently. And that's something we talk about. Like, is it better to do that fixed payout? But then what happens if the price does go up and we get more return than we offered back to the farmer? So is there a challenge there? What I do know is we've got to just deliver that consistency and predictability. We've also, part of that history of Indigo is we've pivoted in and out of some businesses. And I think we're at a point now where we feel comfortable with our portfolio. I think we got to stick with it, right? This is that time when repeatability is important and kind of the experience curve. Like, having done these carbon harvests for 3 years now, we've learned a lot. And I think that has translated into being better at it than some of our competitors. I think it's really important to keep on that. And then last, like I said, building trust. It's like an everyday thing. It's not like a one-time thing. So I kind of think about what promises we're making out to the customers in the market and how we keep those promises. So I will pause there and open it up for discussion or questions.
Cool. Thanks so much, David. I actually had one clarifying question and also just a comment about what you were just saying about people with key relationships and building trust. That feels really essential to the work succeeding. And also, like, those people with relationships are, on the one hand, really hard to replace. So hopefully they won't go anywhere. And on the other hand, like, not something that I always see in job descriptions, like people who can build trust and like master relationships, but like that feels like that needs to be there. And I have great confidence in everyone in this call basically being able to do that. But I think that's just a really important piece to recognize that I hope can like surface in some more of these climate actions and roles that are relationship driven and need trust and replicability to, and also like trust and replicability while evolving. If we have new information or new science, or like, oh, this practice actually doesn't work, but we trust you and we know that you're telling us the truth, so we'll tweak and evolve together. It just feels like a really nice point that you made. And my clarifying question was just, when you're talking about practice changes versus also doing some soil sampling and running things through your model, are you purchasing and selling the credits based on observing a practice change? Or like, what if the soil sampling comes back and says, like, actually, this isn't legit? How does that feed into the credit counting business or whatever?
Yeah. No, it's a good question. So, I mean, the way that model works is, right, we, basically, once a farmer enrolls with us in the carbon program, we then, exposed to them a variety of practice changes they could implement. In some cases,
Mm.
there's like a 12-month look back, so they could have already done it
Mm.
when they enroll, but as long as it was in the last 12 months, they can get credit for the additionality of it.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
so they can do that. But so they attest to it, right? They say like, okay, I did this thing. I introduced a crop rotation,
Yeah.
and they attest to it. We will validate that through a variety of mechanisms. One is the remote sensing. We can observe actually crop
Hmm.
changes or crop rotations through that.
Hmm.
We soil sampling. You think about the soil sampling a little bit more like ground truth for machine learned modeling, right? Because basically
Hmm.
what's happening is we're saying practice change X plus practice change Y yields this much benefit in carbon in carbon sequestration or soil carbon concentrations. The way that we train that model is through the sample data. So the sample
Mm.
data is less about
Mm.
kind of validating a certain practice change and more about kind of being able to predict, given a practice change, what's the carbon impact of it. And then
Got
we
it.
run the model. So the model we use is something called DACENT. It came out of
Mm.
Colorado State.
Mm.
And our science team does like peer review. So we actually just got published in a journal called Geoderma, which was like,
Mm.
our paper kind of explaining how our model works and how we've tuned it over the years based on the observation of the soil carbon. And basically getting accepted to that, getting published in that journal is kind of a great validation that other scientists believe in our science.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks so much for clarifying that. And we'll go over to Michelle and then Mitch to ask your question.
Oh,
Oh,
you're on
Michelle,
mute. So.
where'd you go? Oh, she's
I
muted.
thought I unmuted myself. I guess I
Oh,
didn't.
yay. Hi.
Thanks to thank you, Lainey, for inviting me. David, I am one of those people who have not attended the climate farm school, although I was investigating it today and like am convinced I've got to do it. So I'm with you. Now we got
Yeah,
to get you to do it
I too definitely want to do it.
too.
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
Lynn will tell you, she actually has been recruiting my wife as well to do it, who's super excited.
Oh, it looks amazing. And as Lainey says, right, you got to get on the ground with the people who are actually
Great.
doing the work. And thank you for speaking to us and appreciate you taking the time. So I actually have a little bit of insight into this. My most recent role was with Perennial. And so I have some familiarity. Um, and I agree, it's drinking from a fire hose, 100%. My question is, and this is one of the things I talked about with Lainey, and one of the things I struggle with regard to soil carbon sequestration and monetizing it in the form of, I think it has to be monetized, right? But monetizing it in the form of a credit, a financial instrument, right, that gets traded, which is the additionality factor and and not just the additionality, actually more salient, the permanence. Because the reality is with biogenic, with carbon, it's going to go out, it's going to come back in, and it's constantly in movement. And my understanding is the amount that gets measured is so minute, right? Like you're really talking about um, you're not the changes are small, so the science has to be, the models have to be incredibly precise. And then you read all of this stuff about, is soil, can as much carbon as we think or has been promoted be sequestered in soil as has been, kind of advertised. And so that's a long way of saying I am curious what your take on all of that is.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I mean, the permanent side is a challenge, right? The standard is 100 years, right? It's a long
Right.
time.
Yeah.
And so, what we do is a couple of mechanisms just to kind of protect on the permanent side. One is that the farmer payment is vested out over 5 years. So at least in the period that we're observing, like if they go and fully till a field that we kind of based a carbon credit on no till or low till, then they kind of forfeit some of the follow-on vesting payments. So there's at least a financial incentive to kind of keep the permanence there. We also allocate a buffer stock.
Mm-hmm.
So when we might generate, let's round numbers, we might generate 100 credits. We only sell like 70 of them. And we keep 30 in a bank that's kind of there to protect against permanence risk, right? Now, to the science side, like I'm not the best person to talk to. You should talk to my colleague AJ, because he's the one who really builds these models and deeply understands it. But I think at the end of the day, it's a volume play, right? There's a lot of acres in the middle of the country growing a lot of crops. And I think, it might be small impact at each level, but there's a lot there, right?
Yeah.
Second thing is, and I think about this in all the kind of climate spaces, like directionally, is it good? I think I'm pretty confident in that, right? Is it at the same magnitude that we think? I don't know, but I think like I feel very low risk of regret that we're moving things in the right direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that is important. I think that, that stubble burn was one that came up to this morning, where I think there was some belief that it was net positive. I think now the science is emerging and being clear that it's not. So we're taking it off the practice list. And in fact, it's actually an eligibility blocker. So you cannot, in our rice program, if you are burning stubble, you can't be part of the program.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate, and I happen to agree with you, but I love hearing people's take on it, because it's a tough one. This is a tough nut to crack, for sure.
Yeah, thank you guys for jumping in and asking direct questions. I love it. Mitch, over to you.
Thanks, Lanny. And you know me, I love being direct. I have two questions. They're kind of clarifiers, and they essentially build on the past two questions from Michelle and Laney here.
Sure.
But thanks as well, David, for being here. So the first one's a little clarifier. You were talking about the premium that like AB InBev and Walmart are paying for that rice that has practices that in scope 3 you can prove that they've been doing practices in the past, and you've said like that kind of skirts the additionality issue.
Right.
So I'm just trying to understand, is it simply they're paying a premium for the rice, or are they actually accounting for that in their scope 3 emissions as a reduction of emissions?
So I think, can I say yes to both? It is both, right? They are paying a premium for the practice change, right? We are then helping them model that into an emissions reduction or carbon sequestration benefit that they are then claiming as part of their scope 3 reduction target, their SBTI target.
So it's not really a credit in that case, though. It's like they're paying a premium, but it's not a trade of a credit. Okay.
Yeah, maybe I should clarify that. Like the farmer, like the farmer enrolls in either the carbon credit program or the scope 3 premium program, not both, right? It's kind of an optionality. We actually programize that. We call that field flex. So the idea being that in a given field, and it's a field level, so a given field could flex, be in carbon or be in we call that source, the scope 3 program, be in one of those two programs, because we actually don't know like what's the highest monetization for the farmer, and so we want to preserve optionality.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I am interested in how that accounting works if they are going scope 3, but and then the carbon credits that Indigo is selling to a variety of customers, what form are those credits being used for? Are they exclusively for scope 3 emissions? Are you selling soil carbon credits as offsets for scope 1 and 2 emissions as well? Because to the durability questions that have been discussed already, my personal take is that soil carbon credits should not be used for scope 1 direct emissions, but that's probably a separate conversation to have. So I'm just curious how Indigo's approaching it.
Yeah. It's a good question. I'll say take this as like a personal point of view, because I'm not actually sure what our official stance on this is. But the way I think about it is we're not opinionated in about the way that the buyer uses the credit, right? So they're not all of our buyers are in the scope 3. They're not all grain buyers, right? And they need not be. Like, our view is that this is for residual emissions. Like once you've worked through your scope 1, 2, and 3 strategies, we believe that a lot of companies are going to have residual emissions that they're unable to kind of get to zero. And so I think to the extent that they have a target and they have capital to deploy, I think it is positive for that capital to be deployed to places where they can actually drive reduction in emissions or sequestration. But yeah, so the buyers are kind of a wide array. The idea being that they, even if they're not in a grain buying situation, they still have the residual emissions and want a high quality way to offset those.
Got it. Okay. I have to jump for a meeting, but thanks, David, and thanks, Lanny, for organizing this.
Thanks
Of course, great to see you, Mitch. Yeah, thanks for the questions.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to me from a kind of an educational theoretical standpoint, and I know there's like practical, business dynamics involved too, to think about the companies that are buying credits and to sort of like place them on a spectrum of like, yeah, how rigorously are we able to like be following the science-based targets and be reducing the scope 1 emissions that are more directly under your control versus like scope 2 and 3, and what are the right priorities to be setting. I think that's a really interesting conversation that I would love for folks at Terra or like people from those companies to be coming to Terra to learn and discuss. But yeah, I don't know. I have my own opinions, and I'm glad that actual work is happening on the ground to be hopefully moving the needle. So yeah, thanks for weighing in. And Katie, we'll go to you for your question.
Great. So a follow-up question on the kind of accounting and verification for the scope 3 program. Is the modeling of carbon sequestered and the verification of that do you use the same tools and methodology as you do for carbon markets, or is it a separate method?
There's a lot of commonality. So that DayCent model is used in some crops. Like it depends on the crop type. Some crops we don't use that DayCent model. We use different models. But there's kind of, if you think about it kind of like at a higher level, there's a set of steps that we go through in that pipeline, right? There's a data validation step, for example, that's even before we get into modeling, where we kind of make sure that we believe the data and there's no outliers. Or like we've had some cases in the past, and this is part of our learning is, we've had some cases where people put in fertilizer application numbers that just don't make any sense, or they put in 5 years of fallow in their, because for carbon, you need 5 years of history. So sometimes you see just nonsensical inputs. And so that's part of the iteration we've gone through is, building software filtering to say, like, this doesn't make any sense. Ideally, we want, like, at the time the farmer enters it, to be able to say that doesn't make any sense. But reality wise, it's like they do all their input. We then run a kind of engine that shows out some errors, and so we validate it. But then after that, it goes through the modeling, then goes through a verification, an internal kind of error checking, spot checking process, and then we pass it off to the verifier. The verifier often comes back to us and says, like, we don't like the way you did this, or there's something that doesn't make any sense. So it's a pretty rigorous pipeline of validation. But I will also tell you that it's gotten better year on year, so that the implication is it's not perfect, and I don't believe it probably ever will be perfect. But I think in the focus of continuous improvement, we are learning each time we go through the process.
Well, thank you. And then I have a separate question. You mentioned there were some that you recommend practices to farmers, and you mentioned some of them you thought they were going to reduce carbon emissions, they wound up not. Have there been any challenges or surprises in terms of the impact of practices on yields? And have farmers ever come back with feedback in that area? Like, okay, I reduced my emissions and I'm getting these carbon credits, but actually my yields went down in the first couple of years.
Yeah, it's a great question. We don't actually directly collect yield data. So we don't have an empirical way of kind of comparing the yield data to yield results with the practice changes. The expectation is that yes, it will be neutral to negative to yield in the near term, like a lot of these practice changes will be. And so I think that's part of the value proposition is like, yes, you're taking a hit on near term kind of crop volume, right? Maybe you're saving some money on fertilizer, but I think in my mind, the reason for the carbon credit is to enable you to do something that otherwise would not make financial sense.
Thank you.
And that, to me, that's like the fundamental of the carbon credit is like, it should be something like, I wouldn't have done this if I didn't get this credit.
which is interesting. And I don't know that we have enough time doing this to be able to observe or understand like the counterfactual of like if you didn't implement these, some would say more regenerative practices, and climate change is having all these extreme weather events and impacts year after year. Like your crop yield might have gone down anyways, but maybe it's going down less than it would have because you're diversifying, or if some of the cover crops can be economical cover crops, you're getting potentially a harvest where you might have had none if you just had one crop in the field, and that's it for the year.
Well, the other thing we haven't talked about is co-benefits, right? So like the farmers that like are really deep into our program, they just brag about their water infiltration rates. They're just, there's a lot of other things that they talk about in terms of and resilience that I think practices that, I don't think directly reflect in our models.
Yeah, totally. I think just having a more qualitative conversation about some co-benefits, I do feel like they're really tricky to model, but it's really important because like we saw this not in farms that were participating in carbon markets, but all over California last winter with the crazy rains. Farms that had crops in the field or soil health building practices were able to absorb a heck of a lot more rainfall and have the water infiltrate than farms that were, monocrops of strawberries, for example, that just got like washed out. So that's important to be at least, conversing about, keeping in the conversation. Okay, we'll
Just
go to
to build
Adam.
on, this isn't a question, but I was just going to
Adam.
say there's a great study that BCG did. I'll try to find the link to it. That if you guys haven't seen it, about the increased profitability on farms in Germany from implementing regenerative practices. So they get some money from the credit, but the actual profitability of the farm overall, for a variety of reasons, increases, and it's I think by 60% over a 5-year horizon or something like that. So it's pretty impactful.
Oh yeah, yeah. Please send that. And Michelle, do you want to just go ahead with your question too?
Oh sure. So I'm sorry, I didn't ask this earlier. One of the challenges has been alluded to is enabling the farmers to invest in the practices, especially when they might end up having a lower yield in the short term. I don't know, I think this is probably public information, David. If it's not, I totally understand. But what price have you been able to garner for the credits, right? Because that's the big, unit economics is a big factor in terms of being able to compensate the farmer.
Let me check. I have to follow up. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to disclose that. What I can tell you is it's increasing year on year.
Yeah, great. That's what I love. I love to hear that, because I want to, the farm. You want to make enough money so that the farmer, you were able to compensate the farmer in a healthy way.
Yeah. Well, I'll also tell you that part of the business we consider it supply constrained. Like we've been able to sell every carbon credit that we're willing to sell. Like I said, we buffer some of them, but if we get more fields and we get the practices and all the way through our pipeline, we know that's more money. It's more money to us, which is great, but it's also more money to farmers.
Awesome. Thank you.
Adam, let's go to you, and then I'll bring in a few of Ram had 2 questions he put in the chat. But over to you first, Adam.
Yeah, cool. A little bit change of pace from the carbon credit discussion, but I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about your relationship with some of the major ag players, the Bayers and Syngentas of the world, and I see you guys have like a sustainable crop and seed division. How does that kind of stack up versus what a lot of those companies are trying to build, and where there's relationship/competition?
It's exactly, you put it well. I mean, I think we are in like a co-opetition mode. What I can tell you, I think, pretty publicly, is our relationship with Corteva. So Corteva partners with us. I can give you a little bit of history. So Indigo started off as a direct-to-grower, we call DTG kind of model. We were going marketing directly to grower. We've shifted gears, and we are now a through partner motion. So we still have some legacy direct-to-grower relationship, but all new growers that are enrolling are coming through a partner of one sort or another. Usually an input provider, a co-op. That's kind of the classic model that we're seeing. And so as an example, Corteva works with us. They signed up hundreds of thousands of acres this past year into our program. And of course, they have a relationship as an input provider. They're looking to expand on the value proposition that they offer to those growers. I think they're looking to stake out a sustainability position, right, which is complicated in the fertilizer business. But so, yeah, I think, we look at those as both potential partners and definitely competition, right? It is, I hate the way we phrase it, but it is a bit of a land grab. Like, everybody wants to kind of establish that position, working with the growers to make sure that they are viewed as a trusted partner there. We are also competing on the other end of the value chain. We're competing to kind of work with the Bunge's of the world and the Walmarts of the world and Pepsi. And, there's a lot of companies that have big scope 3 claims to substantiate, right? And so it's a competitive market. I think we feel good about the position we're in because of both the experience curve that we've built on the carbon side that then helps us on the scope 3 side. Carbon is the kind of product name for our carbon credit business. And then secondly, for the science that we've got. I think the science, we feel very confident in what we're doing. There are companies that, participate like on one segment or another that don't go through verifiers, that self-verify their carbon credit. Like there's other practices, and I think it's okay. I don't mind that there's like a spectrum from high quality to less quality. We're going to stay focused on the high quality end of the spectrum.
Gotcha. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for that question too, Adam. That was super insightful. And I feel like, yeah, this is just really, really providing awesome food for thought for me about how to work with farms at different scales on the regenerative farming transition and spectrum. And, and I think this gets to one of Ram's questions a little bit as well, which is, do you work with small and medium-sized farms? Maybe not, if that's not filtering through the less direct to grower mechanism. And so he has 2 questions. 1, do you work with small and medium-sized farms as well? And 2, you said you get some data directly from farmers for the modeling. Can you elaborate on the kind of data you want from them? Any friction in getting that data? Or like, we don't want to be on our laptops. Come get the data yourself.
Yeah. So question 1 was like small, medium, and the answer is, we are not really opinionated. We would certainly welcome anybody into the program. We do, the partners that we work through to kind of enroll farmers tend to focus on big guys. That's just kind of return on investment because it is, there's a cost of sale, there's a cost of engagement with the farmer. And so, yeah, I think it does end up being over-indexed on large. A lot of what we're doing right now on scope 3 is corn. They tend to be large farms. And so I think it probably is over-indexed on the large size side of the equation. So question 2, remind me again. So that is, the data collection.
Data collection from farmers, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we do see that friction. We can see through our software instrumentation, we can see where people fall out of the funnel. So there's people, like enrollment is an important milestone in our customer journey. But then there's a milestone called final file, like where they've done enough data input, and we basically light up the button that says you can now click the button and submit your data. And we are striving to make it 100% conversion from enrollment to final file, but it is not. And the biggest barrier is how much data we collect from them. And especially on the carbon program, when we have to go back 5 years in history, that's just a lot of data that, in many cases, it requires evidence. So if they say they did this kind of fertilizer application, we ask them to upload a receipt. And, did they have the receipt from 5 years ago? Probably not. So there's challenges there. Absolutely. And so our focus here is like pre-fill what we can from our remote sensing technology, so that then it's in the farmer kind of saying, yeah, that's right. And I attest to it. If we import it from a farm management system, that is considered evidence enough. We don't need a receipt. So it's basically collected from the machinery doing the harvesting or doing the fertilizer application. That's evidence. So we always are looking for ways to reduce the actual fat fingering in of data by the farmer, because it's just not the most efficient way to get it.
Thank you. This is Ram, by the way. Besides the receipts, what other information would you want from the farmers? Like
I
you
mean,
mentioned.
the other piece that we haven't talked about here is just field boundaries. So again, we sense the field boundaries from our remote sensing, but we're not, it's not 100%. It's hard to kind of know where a fence line is or something like that based on the satellite imagery. So one of the most common things is, there's the thing called shape files, right? Which are the files that indicate where the field boundaries are. So we are asking the farmer sometime to either upload a file, or that's a good case where sometimes a partner helps us. So some of the partners, for example, are in the crop insurance business. They typically have field boundaries because they needed to know kind of what they're insuring, and so they might provide that data. So oftentimes the partner has some of that data as well. But it's everything from when did you plant, when did you harvest, what cover crops were were in the mix. Grazing is something that's kind of an emerging thing. Like the science is still it's not yet settled science in terms of how grazing really impacts the emissions and the sequestration. So those are things that are on the edge there, but it's that kind of practice data that we're collecting at a field level for multiple years on the carbon side.
Right. Thank you.
Interesting. That last thing on the practices and kind of your comment before about like stubble burning is no longer an acceptable practice based on data made me wonder, like, are there potentially new practices that you could see being added in as valuable means of generating credits? And like one thought, as you're just saying, grazing, that comes to mind is like seaweed feed supplements for cattle who are grazing that could really reduce their methane emissions, that have sort of data to back that up. So if you were like integrating grazing from cows that also had seaweed feed supplements, like that seems like one of those intriguing, promising things that I read about and am intrigued about. But I don't know if you could see that becoming, something that Indigo would kind of verify and pay for or back up.
I'm writing it down, and I will ask my science partners on that one. That definitely sounds interesting. Yeah, I mean, I can tell you just that, that we had a discussion about the rice program earlier today, and there was a bunch of things we're taking off the list because the science is not clear or it looks negative. And then there's things we're introducing on the list as new practices that we are seeing as positive. So it is a changing landscape, and I think that's a good thing. It's frustrating. Like I told you already, we want predictability. So the farmer might get frustrated. You told me it was good to do this, and now you're telling me it's not. And the answer is no. The science changed, and we are using empirical data to kind of base it. I feel very much like Tony Fauci during COVID. It's like, we are learning, and as we learn, we're changing our advice. That's true.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, well, I'm curious to keep filtering in the data on the seaweed and the cows, because it all seems really promising. But farmers that I've talked to who have said, like, we can't yet, throw in this feed supplement because it's not approved as a certified organic feed, and we're trying to sell certified organic grass-fed beef, is another interesting thing. And I'm like, whoa, like, why won't these organic certifiers like verify this seaweed? It seems very organic to me. So anyways, it's just like getting all the people to align around the data and getting the data to be strong and robust enough is interesting, even though I feel like a sense of urgency from a climate
and we haven't even talked about like the intersection between what we're talking about, regenerative farming, and organic and non-GMO, right? Which are different things, and in many cases more substantial burdens of proof, but not this, right? And so there's, I think, scar tissue from those programs as well for a lot of farmers.
Yeah, totally. Okay, I think we have a little bit more time for some of Shirley's questions, which she typed in because she's in a noisy environment. So we'll try and get to some of these, and then we'll wrap up shortly. So what is the incentive for a Corteva to partner with you? Are you doing any revenue sharing with your partners? And what are your biggest challenges? And if you could wave a magic wand to create a solution that solves some of them, what would it be? Oh, this was a big question in the Hudson Valley group in September.
So the first one is, we do rev share with Corteva and any of those partners that are enrolling farmers. That is part of their value prop. In some cases, there's also like co-benefits to them. Like I said, they want to establish a sustainability position. I think they're always hopeful that we'll come back with science that says like, oh, actually, if you apply this Corteva product, it's positive for your carbon generation or your carbon credit generation. We listen, but that's not how the science works. The science works with the way the science works. So it's like the seaweed question. Like, if we partner with the seaweed supplement maker, they'd be like, all right, you're sure this is good, right? And we'd be like, well, let's see. And so that's part of the equation. But primarily, this is business, it's a rev share. To the magic wand question, wow. I think one is what we already talked about. Like, I would love to not require farmers to do any data input. I want them to be out there planting, harvesting. That's what they're there to do. I think the second one is, look, if I could erase the negative history on this company, on Indigo, I would love to do that. I can't. It's part of our shared journey, and yeah, it just is. And then I think third would be, this is a double-edged sword, because I like where we're positioned. Like, it's a heavy burden. Like, there's a lot of work. We invest a lot on the science side. We invest a lot on data collection. It's expensive to do what we're doing, right? And I've already kind of signaled to you guys, we are not a profitable company right now, right? So that right now, the revenue and the cost don't quite pencil out. Like, we believe we have a line of sight to it, and it's very important that we get there. But it's a heavy burden, right? And that's tough, because like, if you can't make a profit doing this, people won't do it, and we need people to do it. So I'm highly optimistic. I tend to be a realistic optimist, but I think we have to believe that there's money to be made here, because that's the way our system works.
Totally. That's a great point, and maybe brings me to one final question, which is just if you have like thoughts on how other folks in our Climate Farm School / LFA community can get involved in some of this work, or like if you're seeing opportunities from your vantage point. I think that's just interesting. Or like, do you think there needs to be more startup activity to, not necessarily compete, but like collaborate and cooperate in helping farmers get additional revenue for regenerative practices and like move the needle on climate change? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, first of all, yeah, I love the kind of energy level in the markets right now for climate positive startups. Like, I think it's a great thing. It got hard when the cost of capital went up and all the investors got, kind of changed their perspective. So I'm optimistic, but I know it's a challenging front. For me, like, kind of the shift in terms of agronomy and advisory to the farmers is something that we need to see happen faster, right? Like, I still think it's a slow moving market, and it goes back to like the crop year, and there's only 40 cycles. And so I don't know, to me, like, accelerating the pace of kind of getting the gospel spread. And even if we're skeptical and we kind of believe that it's going to change, okay, that does, like, I believe in the directionality of it. So the faster we can get everybody, I tend to believe this is just about kind of penetration and adoption. I think it's about kind of, being able to see the guy down the road who I see at church, that he's doing these things, and he's actually, bragging about his water infiltration rate, and he's got a new pickup truck because he's making more money. Like, that's what I think drives the social pressure. So I think we need adoption, and we need all the other pieces of the ecosystem that the farmers are listening to be, kind of helping us along that journey. It's okay to be skeptical. I think it's okay to kind of not know where it all ends up, but I think that the arrow only points in one direction.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. And the adoption penetration piece, and meanwhile, not losing farmers that are trying to convert to regenerative because the economics or the livelihood is too hard, is really important. And I think, I would just love to be able to support more alumni in being farmer supportive roles. So that's something I'm thinking about a lot, and excited to connect you all to any opportunities that you're exploring or that I'm confined. And so, yeah, we're all in it together.
Thanks so much for the great questions. This was a very engaged chat. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here with us, David. And thanks everyone for joining. And I'll share a recording link out just to you, David, and those who RSVP'd, so that folks can check it out later if we're going to go back to these awesome questions and learnings. But yeah, this was great. I hope everyone has a great rest of your days, and look forward to more similar community building chats like this in the future.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Cool. Take care. Bye, David.